Well, while they're setting up my wonderful doodle board there, I had someone come up to me. It was so sweet, and they said, I hope this isn't a dumb question. I said, no question is dumb. And they said, would you, I have to write it down before I forget. They said, would you talk about your third point this morning? And I said, really? You want me to remember my third point this morning? Which third? You know, I had 24 points and 5. And they said, the one about, that John referred to in his prayer, about the beauty of the Lord purging our imagination. And so there's one. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. They said, what did you mean by that? And how would you apply that? And I said, I'd love to share that. And then, come on. I'm not supposed to talk to it, but it worked when I talked to it. Then someone said that they don't like to talk in front of people, so they wrote down their question. So I'm going to write this one down. But I was thinking we should be excitedly hoping to go beyond 2. And so we have a microphone right there and a microphone right there. And if you have a question, I would love to, as soon as I write this one down, I'll read it to you so that I remember it. I would love to hear at least 2 more. And these are Bible question and answers, nothing about sports because I'm sports challenged. But this one says, does each Christian have a specific angel assigned to him or her? And what is the responsibility of the angels? So let's see, angels, assignments, I guess, and do they have what is the responsibility? Okay. This is just for me to remember. That's my scribble. So, okay, do we have any more? Because I could go for hours on these, but I want to gauge it by, nobody's brave enough to ask a question? There we go. Oh, so you can just boom it out from all, let's see if I can hear it.
Just wondering your opinion on King James versus New King James.
Well, I'm glad you asked for my opinion because that is purely what it will be. But was the third one NIV? In the NIV. Well, that one is so easy that I'll just draw a box and say that we're talking about 2 completely different, it's like apples and oranges. This would be a Western manuscript or Byzantine or majority. That's the 3 ways that this majority manuscript family, the King James, New King James. In fact, the National Geographic just, don't forget your question, you 3. Wait a minute. That is more than 2, Pat. 1, 2, 3. Okay, just a second. I'll come right back to you, but I don't want to forget what I was saying. The National Geographic just ran a special on this very question. Any of you that get the National Geographic, that was the most remarkable thing I've ever seen. They did a 500th anniversary or the 400th anniversary of the King James, and they did this huge spreadsheet and showed exactly everything I'm telling you. This is the Eastern manuscript. It's also known as the critical text, and it's also known as the minority text. And this one was actually started in the times, the 19th century. They assembled this one from all of the archaeological digs that they started finding all these remnants of manuscripts. This one basically is, the family of it is what Luther used when he did his translation of the Bible. This is what Wycliffe used. This is what, all those early manuscripts. And it's also what became known as the received text or the Textus Receptus. Basically, doctrinally, the only difference between the 2 manuscripts, I'm not talking about the translations because there is a big difference between them, but between these manuscripts family is the Western text, the Byzantine, the majority. It's interesting, probably 90% of all sermons that quoted the Bible from the 2nd century through about the 6th century, 90% of all the sermons. Now, see, pastors, you know how this morning I read 4 verses, but a lot of times we'll read a whole chapter. Pastors, as they preach, would quote inside their sermons text. And what's interesting is that 90%, approximately, of all the printed sermons of what is called the post-apostolic fathers, the pastors from after the time of the apostles, the 2nd century through the Byzantine church era in the 6th century, quoted from this one. And about 10% of them quoted from this one, which is maybe 15%. So it's fascinating that the church history up through the 19th century primarily had this family of manuscripts. This family of manuscripts is shorter. They're from desert areas. They're older. That's the key, why people like them. They're older, but they're not older because they're closer to the original. They're older because they didn't rot in the deserts. And these are newer because they were in Europe and areas where it rains and where bugs and mice and everything ruin stuff. So the King James, New King James is based on the Western Byzantine majority text. The NIV, though, is a translation, and that is a whole different realm. It's not a literal translation. So we'll go like that. It's not a literal translation. These are. So the danger with the NIV is that it has started drifting away from the premise of a literal translation. And these little blocks here are Greek words. And each, in a literal translation, you put an English word to stand above each Greek word. So that's this side. But the NIV, they go like this, and they go, we'll put this word here, and we'll put a word here that's not, it's kind of close, and then we'll put a literal one above. And so it's called dynamic, and no longer are the words of the text. It's called a dynamic equivalence translation, which means it's close, but it's not anchored to the word. And so today's Living, the NIV, all the T and everything else NIVs are all this side of the non-literal. So I would always stay far away from a non-literal for constant doctrinal Bible study. There's nothing wrong with reading them. You can read the Living Bible. But if you're going to study doctrine, you need to stick to a literal, word-for-word translation of the Bible, not one of the new, modern, like Eugene Peterson, NIV, and all that stuff, that is no longer tied directly to the Greek text. So, did I say enough? Good. Okay, let's get all these questions, but we'll go back. I'm ready.
Why didn't God say underworld instead of hell?
I didn't catch that. Why did God say?
Why didn't God say underworld instead of hell?
Underworld instead of hell? Yeah.
Okay, so you want to know about, why did he say the underworld and not hell, or Hades, or keep talking so I understand what you mean. Unless someone understood what he said and just say it again for me.
Like, why did he call it hell and not something else?
Why did he call it hell and not something else? Did you? I don't think the microphones are really made for this direction. I realize that because it must be what I sound like to you. It's fascinating. Now I see why they have all those things there. But I heard hell, and I heard what did God call, and did I hear underworld too?
Yeah.
And Pat, what else is he asking?
I think he's wondering why God didn't use the word hell instead of underworld, or underworld instead of hell. Yeah.
Good. Actually, there are 13. I mean, I won't probably get to this tonight, but I will do it another time. There are 13 different names in the Bible for the afterlife. And just for you to know, this one you're talking about, hell, is translated in the literal translation from the word Hades, which is grave, and Gehenna, which is from the Valley of Hinnom. But there's also lake of fire, and there's also and we could go on. There's Tartarus, and there's Abaddon, Tartarus. But basically, why God uses the word hell at times is, and I'll just give you a short one on that. Gehenna comes from the valley Gehenna of Hinnom. And Hinnom was the garbage dump of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem was up on a hill like this, and here's the valley of Hinnom right there, and here's the walled city. And they had right here in the walled city a little gate. It was called the Dung Gate. Can you guess what they pushed out that gate? Dung and trash and dead animals and anything else. In fact, when they used to burn babies alive to Molech, this big, ugly idol, they would burn them down there in the valley of Hinnom. And so basically, Hinnom always had smoke rising from it, and it smelled bad, and there were corpses and, rotting stuff and dung and everything else just sliding down the hill to that valley. And so Jesus used the word Ge and then Hinnom, and he said, Gehenna is going to be a lake of fire, because this thing burned. It's like the valley of Hinnom, because it's the garbage dump of the universe. And those who are right now in the temporary spot, which Hades is most often translated grave in the Bible, those who are there are awaiting at the great white throne being cast into hell, Gehenna, which is the lake of fire. But it also says that death is going to be cast in there, and the false prophet and the Antichrist, as well as Satan and his angels, as well as whoever's name is not found written in the book of life. But it's a little more complicated than that, but I thought I would get one done real quick. Did I answer enough for you?
Where does the underworld come in?
The underworld is, right now, God has, in the Bible, all people who die, this is earth, all people who die appear to be from the Scriptures, and it isn't in the center, but they are in the grave or Hades that's on the earth. Now, we talk about the underworld like criminals and sometimes with demons, but every time in the Bible, 100% universally, and most often in the book of Ezekiel, it talks about the pit. This thing is called the pit in the Scriptures over and over again, and it's under the world. This is the earth, and somewhere down, we know very little about the inside of our earth. There's a project going on that's trying to go down several miles, and it's in the news all the time. We have no idea other than bouncing around, listening to earthquakes bounce around in here. We have very little idea of what's down in the core, and I'm not talking about Jules Verne and dinosaurs. God has some kind of a place called the pit that he says is located in the earth down. And every time the Lord pulls back the veil, the people there are conscious, they're alive, they see other people coming. It's not hell in the sense of this lake of fire, blackness of darkness place. It is a holding place that's very uncomfortable. And prior to Christ's ascension, it had two compartments. There was the pit that was the sad side, the unhappy side, and then there was this thing called Abraham's bosom. It was still in the earth, and the way we know that is, out of this place, when Saul conjured up through the witch of Endor, Samuel, it says that Samuel came up from beneath, and so, this is the surface of the earth. Abraham's bosom is where the righteous were, believers, and God allowed him. He couldn't come up on his own and write a book about it. That's just an inside joke. God sent him up, Samuel, to confront Saul. But the reason we know that it was really Samuel and that he came from here is that when the witch, see, witches can't really bring people up from down here. It's just a fake. They have demons impersonate people. But when this witch at Endor did her little, ooh, for a demon to come, Samuel came, and it scared her. It said she screamed in terror. She never had a person come out of the pit, or come out of the underworld. And so out of Abraham's bosom, by the way, this is parallel with paradise. It's parallel with paradise, and it moves. Jesus moved it in Luke 23. He said, today you'll be with me in paradise. And we find it by the time we get to Revelation. Paradise has migrated from here in the center of the earth, the abode of the righteous called Abraham's bosom. It is removed from down there in the underworld and taken to heaven. But up until that time, all of the righteous were down there. Abraham was down there, Samuel was down there, Noah was down there, all the righteous saints were down there, awaiting in Abraham's bosom, awaiting what it says in the last verse of Hebrews chapter 11. It says the last verse of Hebrews 11 is, they without us could not be perfected. They could not enjoy the wonders of access to God, the Old Testament saints, believers, until after the cross. And it's fascinating. So I didn't want to answer that, but it was good. Thanks for asking. I only wanted to hear it. I didn't want to answer. Okay, Pat, real quick, and then we'll get back to the first one.
Real quick, I have a friend who recently lost her husband in an accident, and she feels that God had nothing to do with it. God didn't cause it, didn't not cause it, just happened. And I think I've learned from you that actually God is in control, and it's a sign of confidence, the fact that he is in charge. And could you comment on that, and what verses would I use to say you have all the more confidence that God is still in charge, even if in a sad situation?
Yes, and believer or not believer?
Believer.
Oh, my. I mean, yeah. Okay, what verse? Good. Thanks. Now, wait a minute. Is that my educator friend? You guys should say, hello, my name is. That's Pat Grubb.
Hello, my name is Jason Goodane.
That's what I thought, my educator friend. Go ahead, Jason.
Okay, this question is about the canonization of the books of the Bible. One of the criteria is that the book in question was referenced by ancient church leaders. So in Jude 14 and 15, it quotes a prophecy from Enoch that can be found in the second chapter of the Book of Enoch. So if one of the criteria is that it was referenced by ancient church leaders, why isn't this book considered a part of a biblical canon?
Very good, Jason. That is true, and boy, I'll never get to those first two. There are a lot of things cited in the Bible that aren't, that where they come from are not inspired. Jesus cited a historic event when he talked about the people that died when the tower fell on them in this time. There are also references to the book of Jasher and the book of this and that and that. But the book of Enoch and all of the other books that are either apocryphal, the Apocrypha, which the Roman Catholic Church accepts. There's also another group of books called the Pseudepigrapha. These are all grapha. I can't talk and write at the same time. There are a whole group of books that were written, some of them in the intertestamental period. Do you remember that Malachi finished his writing about 400 years before the birth of Christ? So from the end of the Old Testament, 400 BC, actually about maybe 431 BC, Malachi closed out what is considered the canon of the Old Testament. Then there's this 400 years of silence time that's just, it's called that in church history, the 400 silent years. And then we have the dawning of the New Testament period of time, which the life of Christ is about from BC 4 to about 26 AD approximately. And then John the Baptist, the last prophet, would have been heralding Christ somewhere there, depending on where you put the crucifixion, between 26, 27, or 30. And then all the way from approximately 30 AD to when John writes Revelation, so maybe 96. That's considered the New Testament period. These books, Book of Enoch and all that, are books from this time period. And also the Apocrypha, many of them are in this time period. So they were known to the New Testament writers, some of them. And one of them, this one, the Book of Enoch, is quoted. But as long as we're doing this, look at Acts chapter 17, because I want to show you, just because it's cited doesn't make it canonical. And this is how we answer that. Let me find it. In Acts chapter 17, he said, verse 28, verse 27. So Acts 27, verse 27. I want to show you what Jude was doing when he cites this book. Because did you know it's kind of like all truth is God's truth concept, that you can find something that is absolutely true even in something that's not inspired. Well, Paul does that. In verse 26, he says, and he is made of one blood, every nation to dwell on the face of the earth. He's determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, that they should seek after the Lord in hope that they might find him, for he's not far from each of us. And then, it's interesting, for in him we live and move and have our being, as also some of your own poets have said. Now look at the end of verse 28. For we are also his offspring. It's interesting there that Paul quotes from two Greek writers, Epimenides and who's the other one? He quotes from Aratus, yeah. He quotes from two Greek authors, unsaved, unbelievers, Greeks, pagans. And look, he cites them. Because you know what they says? They said something that's true. We are his offspring. And in him we live and move and have our being. So Paul is not saying that the writings of these guys, Aratus and Epimenides, are inspired. Nor is Jude saying that the Book of Enoch is inspired. We know the Book of Enoch and all the other apocryphal books that are from this time period. And by the way, the new ones, like this recent Jesus had a wife little thing that was in the news, those are from a time period way in here to the New Testament world. And a lot of these are from Egypt, and they're from all of these, well, that one, it was a Coptic, the one that was in the news recently. But they are from the region around the Holy Land, concurrent with and even going beyond the New Testament period. So back to Jason's question. Canonization, the word canon, actually, I don't think it has that extra N in there. But canonization has to do with measuring up. One of them was that the apostles were a contemporary or a companion of the writer, as in Luke, and as in James, or as in Mark, who was with Peter. James was our Lord's brother, and Luke was companion of Paul. But the canonization process was that the books as they were written were recognized by the church as they were written to have been from the Lord. It wasn't that there were a whole bunch that people were looking through and saying, well, I guess this one makes it and this one doesn't. In fact, what is interesting, the Council of Jamnia is the late first century when they started talking about this after the time of the apostles, all the way through when the church in the 4th century actually said this is the canon, it isn't like they decided then. It was that from the time of Christ and the apostles, right after the apostle John said this is the end in AD 96, and this is the last book, Revelation, and Paul calls all the Old Testament scriptures scripture, and Peter calls Paul's writing scripture, and then John said this is the end of scripture. Those 27 books were recognized by the church, and finally they had a council that said that they were canonized in about 431 or so, but and Jamnia before that. But the church had believed that they were apostolic from when they were written. But when we talk about Jude citing the Book of Enoch, it's no different than Paul citing other sources. It is just them picking a piece of truth out of something that's not inspired and including it into their writing, as Jude 1 and as Paul did in Acts 17. But you guys, you snuck those in. That I was going to try and do these in order. What do we say when someone's husband dies? We say, or anybody dies, we say Psalm 139 is the first one. It says in Psalm 139 that every day of our life was written down in the Lord's book before we ever lived one. We say Hebrews 9, which says 26 and 27, it is appointed unto man once to die. Nobody dies prematurely from God's perspective. No one dies accidentally. There are no such things as accidents with God, only his appointments, because he is truly in charge, and certainly he is in charge of the length of our days. We are not. And death is actually his appointment that he has set for us. And for specifically a believer, it says it's appointed unto man once to die, after that the judgment. That is for the unbelievers. But for us, it is when Psalm 23, verses 4 through 6 take place, where David said, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thou, that's my good shepherd, art with me. You know what's interesting? Jesus actually comes at the moment of our appointment and walks us through the valley of the shadow of death. I used to love the founder of Tulsa Bible Church, used to attend Tulsa Bible Church. He had founded it many years before, and he was very elderly. He used to be so old he would lean against a pillar in the service because he couldn't sit up straight. He was so old he couldn't sit up, but he wanted to be at the services, so they found a spot where he could lean against one of the metal poles in the church, and he would sit there through the whole service, couldn't hardly lift his head, but he was holding out for the rapture. And I remember visiting him in the ICU as he was dying, and he had all of his oxygen on and everything, and he pulled it aside and he said, tell me why I'm going to miss the rapture. I said, me? I'm going to tell you why you're going to miss the rapture? I can't believe you'd even ask me that. And I said, Willard, his name was Willard Heck, I said, there are two raptures. I said, there's the group rapture, which is what Paul talked about in 1 Thessalonians 4. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout and the voice of the archangel and the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. And then we which are alive and remain shall be harpazoed up together with them. But then I said, there is the private rapture. I said, in the private rapture is when the Lord himself comes to walk you, just you, Willard, through the valley of the shadow of death, and to take you, Psalm 23:6, home to dwell forever in the house of the Lord. I said, which would you rather be a part of? A group or just Jesus with you? He put his oxygen mask back on. He said, the group. And I said, then I'm going to tell you, you've got the private one coming. And I said, the Lord is coming. And you know what I enjoyed doing his funeral? It was just utterly packed. He touched so many people's lives. Started a Christian camp, started a lot of ministries. It was interesting. Many unsaved people came, and I said, did you know what? We know exactly where Jesus Christ was last Thursday. at 9 a.m. He was in the hospice care of the Heck home basement, where Willard breathed his last breath, and Jesus came straight to him. And as he closed his eyes and took his last breath on earth, the Lord walked him safely through the valley, because he had written down every day of Willard's life in his book. And he had set an appointment with him. So, and then another thing, Pat, I would say is Romans 8:28, that God causes all things to work together for good. There are no accidents, and the death of anyone, whether it's an infant or an elderly person or a young person or a military person or anybody, for the unbeliever, it was an appointment and they're headed for judgment. For a believer, it was written down all their days, and they also had an appointment, and Jesus came for them, and he took them home. And for those of us who are alive and remain, we have a group exit. So that's what I would say to her, and that's what I say often to people. Let's see. Now, angels. That was the one that was written. Do we have angels assigned to us, and what are their responsibilities? The first verse I think of is Hebrews 1:14, and you might want to look there in your Bible. And it says in Hebrews 1:14 something very interesting. This is before, well, there's a lot of ways you can take this, but I personally interpret it this way. Are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister for those who will inherit salvation? So it appears that there are angels assigned that watch over the heirs of salvation. And I personally believe it's before and after you're saved. In fact, I believe that the Lord knows those that are his, and the devil is trying to thwart the plan. And I believe that the Lord watches over people that aren't even saved yet, that he knows are going to come to him. They are heirs of salvation. So that's the first one I think of. And yes, there are angels. By the way, angel, I mean, it's very hard to just answer one little thing. You know that there are 7 types of bad angels, and probably there are 7 types of good angels. But the bottom rank of angels, they're messengers. Angelos, the word angelos, literally means a messenger. So the basic level, probably the majority of angels are these messenger types. And then among the bad ones on this side, demons are these fallen messengers. But then, you know, that there are all these different ones that are mentioned, and when we were in Job, I told you about that, and the most powerful one, of course, is Lucifer, that's a cherub. So we know exactly what Satan looks like. He has 4 faces, and he's covered with eyes, and all that. But among the good angels, the messengers are these, and they are messengers of God. They watch over heirs. Now, another verse to look at is in Matthew. Jesus said something very interesting in Matthew. In fact, if you look at Matthew 18:10, the Lord, I mean, it's intriguing to study this. And if you ever really want to study, there's a whole chapter in systematic theology that we're studying as deacons and elders by Wayne Grudem on angels, and he really teaches an awful lot about demons. Most of us have no understanding of how the constant occultic overtones in our movies and the games. You know, I mean, I remember when Dungeons and Dragons, you know, people were playing that game and the role playing and all that, and people started getting alarmed because of the suicides and all the crazy stuff going on. It's because they had no idea of the interest demons have in any occultic activity. They are there like flies and like hornets on sweet stuff. And so with the advent of so much with the internet and movies, demonism is growing. And by the time we get to Revelation 9, it says that people are worshiping demons in the middle of the tribulation. And they would rather worship a demon than the Creator God. And they will curse the living and true God who's sending the plagues and cling to the demons. That's how powerful demons are. But Matthew 18:10, And let me just read, this is fascinating. It says, "Take heed that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I say to you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven." Their angels. It's interesting. Jesus seems to imply that in Matthew 18 that little people, children, have their angel, theirs. Isn't that interesting? That there's almost an assignment. And there are probably billions, if not more, angels. Because the Greek language, the highest number in Greek, they aren't so refined as us to have all of our, billion, trillion, quadrillion, octillion, all that stuff. They just had the word myriads. And when they start talking about angels, they go myriads of myriads. Kind of like astronomy. It used to be people looked at the sky and said, countless as the stars. And then they looked up and they found out there's 8,000 of them visible to the human eye. But when they started in the 17th century, the Dutch started polishing lenses, and they made the first telescopes and started looking out there. They found out that some of those 8,000 dots were galaxies. And then as they increased the telescopes, they found out that what they thought, first it was a star, then they found it was a galaxy, then they found out it was a cluster of galaxies. And so the more they look, in fact, they just found the most ancient and most densely part of the universe with galaxies, and they were just talking about that about 2-3 months ago. It's kind of like this. What we used to think was a myriad, 8,000, became galaxies, which became billions, which became billions of billions. And so myriads of myriads we say 10,000 times 10,000, which is hundreds of millions. But actually it doesn't say that in the Bible. It says that there are myriads of angels. So it's very possible that not only is there one angel for every person on the earth, there's still all those myriads that never move and stay around the throne. There's a whole group of them that all they do is stand around the throne and they're bowing the whole time. They don't seem to move. Other than bowing. So angels, yes. Are they assigned? Yes. Specifically, and I could go through many others, they're assigned to the heirs of salvation. They're assigned to the little people. There's the angels that ministered to Christ. He didn't just have one. It says angels came and ministered to him. There are the archangels that come back and forth with messages from God. Their responsibility is just basically to serve the Lord. And that's the good side. And the bad side, their responsibility is just to mess things up. And they love being worshiped. And that's why horoscopes and Ouija boards and tarot cards and, black ball and any occultic stuff invites demons. And they can't inhabit believers, but they can certainly throw a lot of fiery darts in. And if you've ever had something that just hit you and you never thought of that before, and it was just like, right in the middle of singing Holy, 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 you just have the vilest thought, and it just a jolt of almost murderous anger. See, we have to realize that the fiery darts of the evil one are very much the realm, and that's why it says in Ephesians 4, we're supposed to close the door to these. And you ought to read in Ephesians 4 what opens the door to them. Lying opens the door to the underworld. Lust. You know how many young people are being buffeted by demons because they're watching these movies that are, they're just PG-13. They only have a little bit of immorality in them. Demons are like flies for immorality. Wherever it's being allowed in the mind, they start their beachhead there. So that's the bad side. The good side is they're watching over and protecting us. And now, this was the first question. And someone asked me, what was I talking about in point 3? And I have 3 minutes for this, and then we're going to commission our team. Real quickly, look at the last verse of Psalm 90. And if I don't get through all this, you can just look it up yourself. But I talked about the beauty of the Lord purging our imagination. Psalm 90, the last verse, says this. It says, "And let the beauty of the Lord our God be upon us." It's very interesting. The whole construction of this thing is, and I've told you this many times, when I raised with Bonnie our 8 wonderful little children, they used to get peanut butter and jelly all over their face, and the doorbell would ring, and we didn't want them all to look like little monsters, and so I'd say, hold still for a second. I'd get the washcloth, and they would go like this, and I would finally put my hand under their chin to hold them still for a moment, and I would beautify them. And really, that's what Psalm 90 is very much. It says, it's allow the Lord to put his beauty on you. And you say, what is that beauty? Psalm 29:2 says, let me look it up. It says, give unto the Lord the glory, due his name. Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. And basically, the beauty of the Lord is one of his attributes. God is beautiful. There's 2 kinds of attributes of God. Communicable. It's like you can get a cold, it's communicable. Some of God's attributes are communicable. And as we gaze upon him in his word, those attributes are communicated to us. One of them is beauty. And it's a communicable, theologically speaking. There are incommunicable attributes of God. And those are like his omnipresence. No matter how much you hang around God, you'll never be omnipresent. Neither will the saints, Mary, or anybody else, or omniscient, or omnipotent. Those are incommunicable. There are about 17 of God's attributes that theologians say are communicable. And right here in this Psalm 90, when it says, let the beauty of the Lord, that attribute is, he is the sum of everything that is beautiful, that is desirous. In fact, there's a little song, Lord, you are more precious than silver, Lord, you're more costly than gold. You know how the end of that chorus goes? And there's nothing I desire that compares to you. And that's where we get to Psalm, I think it's 75:23. It says, whom have I in heaven but you, and there's none on earth I desire above you. That is the beauty of the Lord, that he is the sum of everything desirable to us. And that's why David said, the greatest day of my life is when I see your face and I awaken in your image. He said, I long for that moment. And truly, this side of glory, for us to understand the beauty of the Lord, to worship him as the sum of all that is desirable, and to allow his beauty, his communicable attributes through his word and the doctrine of his character to be by his Spirit engrafted into our lives, pushes out imaginations of demons and immorality and coveting and everything else. And that's what I meant by the third point. So, hey, I think that was 5. This is a new world record. Let's all stand as Jeff Whitaker is going to come. And as you're standing, Jeff is going to be sending off our next team that is going to serve the Lord, and we're going to pray for them.